Hey, what's up everybody? This is Polio Jr. And in today's video, I wanted to give you guys some instructions on what to do when your computer, um, more specifically your tower, but this can apply to the laptop as well, when your computer is not starting up at all. So maybe you're getting a couple beeps, and you're not getting any video whatsoever. So I'm going to use my little test dummy computer here, and even though it's a little bit older, the process is still the same. So this is actually an older power spec. So the first thing we're going to do is obviously open the tower. So when you look at the back and you see all of these input options, you know that you're going to have to open up the other side, which is where you'll have access to everything. Typically, there's a couple screws on the side. Typically there's a couple of screws on the side, or sometimes you can spin them right off. Some of them just have a handle. So I took my screws off of this power spec. Take off the side here. Now I'm going to flip her over. Now, like I said, this is an older computer, but let's see, make this on flash. So the first thing you want to do is check the RAM. Now, like I said, regardless if this is an older computer, these methods will all be the same. So if you have no video display at all, you just hear beeps, or maybe the computer is turning on and then shutting off, maybe 30 seconds to even a couple minutes, it just turns off. So the first thing we would look at is the memory bay. So, which is typically very easily visible. And so all we would do with that, the first thing we would do is take one of the memory cards out. So we take one of the memory cards out, and then we power on the computer, and then we see what happens. If that doesn't, and if this is the same if you have 4 slots instead of 2. So if you take the one out and it turns on, then you know it's your memory. And then you would, then you would obviously swap your old one out for a different one that's the same pin number and all that good stuff. And then, so if you turn it on and it doesn't work, then just do the same thing with the other memory card. So you'd put the old one back in, take the other one out, start it up, see what happens. If that doesn't work, switch the memory. So you'd put this one in this slot, and this one in this slot. So that's the first thing to always check. That's the easiest thing to check. The next thing would be your graphics card. So it's possible that your graphics card went. And so this one actually has a built-in graphics card, where you plug into the monitor, and that's this guy right here. So if that were the case, what you would do is you would have to get or if it's an existing graphics card that you can remove, like in one of these slots right here, one of these PCI slots, you would make sure it's definitely plugged in all the way, that it's seated correctly. And if so, then you can go through that option and go purchase an inexpensive video card at any Best Buy or Staples or anything like that. Make sure it's the same size, and anybody will help you at one of those stores. And then put in the new video card in the same slot. Make sure it's the same size, and see if that works. So we go through memory first, and then we try out the video card second. And then the third thing that we do is we would check the thermal paste underneath your CPU. So This is when you see the fan like this, almost in the center um, of the motherboard inside of the computer. Um, some of the setups are a little bit different, but you would actually uh, take this apart, and it really isn't that difficult. Whereas you see this whole thing's coming up here. So what I'm going to do is actually there's typically 4 screws, 1, 2, 3, 4. And what I'm going to do is take out those screws and then show you um, how to apply thermal paste to it. Because if your thermal paste is worn out, the computer, if you're lucky enough, will start up, but won't stay on that long. So let's go into that next. Okay, so now we're at the part where the thermal paste would be located. So I did take off the fan, in which you would, if it was this dusty, go clean it out outside, and then also the um, the CPU cooling unit itself, which is this, and this obviously would definitely need to be cleaned out with an air can, compressed air can. But this is where your thermal paste would be put, and typically, like this is a little bit older. If I touch it, you see a little bit of that thermal paste on my finger. So what you would do is just get a Q-tip and some rubbing alcohol, very light, not a lot, and you would just kind of wash this away. I'm going to do that right now. And this may seem, if you have a laptop, some of these you can still access that part of the um, of the CPU, no question. So I tried to just dab some of the rubbing alcohol on, and what I want to do is pretty much clear it off of the CPU top itself. That's what I'm going for here. So, and the alcohol will help remove it completely. So we're doing that, and do a little bit more here. We're doing my best here just to get the thermal paste, the old thermal paste, off of the CPU here. So now typically you would just grab a paper towel just to make sure you got everything. Like that, make sure it's totally clear. And then we do the same thing with the actual cooling unit itself. So I have a couple Q-tips here. And if you see that square, I'm doing my best here with the one hand, we're going to do the same process where we're going to remove the old thermal paste. And from there, and just so you know, you can get thermal paste either on eBay. Best Buy definitely has thermal paste, no question. I actually have a video on just doing thermal paste. So, sorry, I'm trying to use the one hand here, but I'm just trying to get the old stuff off. Because if this stuff is worn out, then the CPU temperature is going to go really high. So the computer just then shuts itself off, and that's just how it works. So we want to clear this as much as possible, as much as we possibly can. What's nice about doing new thermal paste is you can be generous with it, and once you put a new one on, unless the CPU goes completely, you shouldn't have to put thermal paste on for at least another 3 to 5 years. I mean, and sometimes even longer than that. So we want to make sure it's pretty clear. And so this is this is what I have. This is from startech.com. Very inexpensive. Um, and you can get something similar to this. Um, like I said, any Best Buy definitely has it. Um, and it's usually just a small tube with the thermal paste in it. So I'm going to do my absolute best to do this with one hand and not waste your guys' time here. So this is it right here. Take off the cap. And what we do is we get a little bit on there and then we move forward with that. A lot of them will actually come with some sort of spreading apparatus that you can spread the thermal paste around. Worst comes to worst, just use your finger. And you want to make sure that you cover the entire top side of the CPU here with the thermal paste. So try not to get it on the motherboard. And if you do, you can clean it up. And I didn't think that this needed to be said, but obviously while you're doing this, make sure that the computer is completely off. We want to make sure that we're covering the entire processor. And you can be generous. You don't have to go lightly with it. So we do that. And we can leave some extra gook there. It's fine. It's not a big deal. As long as we get the majority, as long as we get the whole processor, we're fine. So you can be generous with it. And then I'm just going to try and find the square that I had here. So we're going to do it on both sides. And it was pretty much like all around, right around here is where it would be. So make sure it's more on the processor end. Definitely. So, and we would just do the same thing. We try to make a nice little square out of it where the previous thermal paste was. And like I said, you can be generous with it. It's not a big deal. The more the merrier. So this is the underside of the cooling unit here. And get a rough square here. Nothing crazy. Don't be worried. Don't get worried if it's a little messy. So, and then after that, we can leave it. That's perfectly fine, even though it looks a little messy. Using one hand here. All we would do is just go directly back on. So this is obviously going to go directly back on to the onto the CPU. We put the clips back in place. I'm sorry. Since I took out the cooling fan, we put the fan back in place first. And make sure you remember which plug it went into as well. So this one has 3 ports, so it would go over to wherever you can find the 3 ports, but just try and remember that. So these 4 screws would get tied back in, and then these clips would go back on. Try and start the computer and see what happens. It does fix a lot of issues if the computer does shut down while you're in the middle of working or whatnot, or if it doesn't power on at all. This is an excellent, easy, inexpensive method. So let me get this back together and then we'll do our last method. Okay, so I didn't I didn't clean it out, but I just wanted to show you the process. So we have our new thermal paste on, and hopefully you wouldn't have to move to this step, but this step is actually very easy as well, and that would be changing out the power supply. And typically, this is where it's just 4 screws where you have the on off button. Easy way to remember. The I is for in and the O is for out, but O is off here. So what we would do here is just take out the power supply. So 1, 2, 3, 4 screws, and anything that is related to the power supply. So let me unscrew this and then we'll go into here. Okay, so the 4 screws are out of the power supply, and as you can see, I can move it. And from here, we want to get rid of anything that's connected to the power supply itself. So now these are old school connections. You'll see the newer one. This is called IDE. The newer ones are called SATA. But so we're taking anything that's connected, that's giving power to the motherboard and any peripheral devices. So here's our main, if you can see that, with all these different colored wires, and it's in like a rectangle. This whole thing would get pulled out. Like I said, anything that's connected to it. And maybe take a couple pictures beforehand on what is connected to what. So when you do get your new power supply, that you're not going to run into any issues here. So this one doesn't seem to be as chaotic as a lot of other ones that I've seen. So let's see here. Sorry for the angle. So we're going to pull out this power supply. Now, let's see how easy she wants to come out. She might not want to come out that easy. So for this one, some of them you can just literally just pull right out and you're good to go. So, and we have all of our power connectors from the power supply are disconnected at the moment. That's all of them right there. So, but like I said, typically it would be relatively easy to get this guy out of here. This might be, sometimes you have to go on the other side of the tower and actually lift it up. So, however you have to do that, if you have to take out the other side as well and pull the whole power supply out, that's perfectly fine. And let me do that real quick. So this one seems to come out from the top, and it looks like it'll come out relatively easy. So that's the whole power supply. Now, when purchasing your new one, you definitely want to make sure that you get roughly the same wattage. So this one is where it says max output power 250 watts. So we want to get at least that. And you can even go higher than that if you need to. If they don't have a 250 watt, also something you can buy at any Best Buy or online. Or you can search up the exact model number and get the exact one that was working for the computer. And they're actually relatively inexpensive. But you don't want to go too crazy over that. Sorry, trying to get this clear. Over the max output power. Like I said, which is 250 watts. So that's one thing you want to look at. And then make sure that, like I said, these are older cables. And a lot of them come mixed now, where they have this and they have the new SATA wires. And just so we are all clear, this is what a SATA power cable looks like. A lot smaller. I'm sorry, this is actually the data cable, but the SATA power cable looks like this, but it's a little bit wider. So, and they're all black. So you typically see this and an IDE mixed together now, but not always. So, and then always make sure that do your best to try and get this exact lineup of the main power source that's going to power the motherboard. A lot of newer ones are about, I think, 4 pins less, so they're about that size, and they still do fit. But every once in a while, um, you get you get one that has shorter pins, and it won't boot up certain aspects of the computer. So try and get the same exact size main motherboard connection, and then after that, all you would do once you have your new power supply is just putting the new one back in. Make sure you remember where everything that was connected to the power supply was. So that's why it's good to take pictures and put her in exactly how the old one was, and then start connecting it back to all of the peripheral devices that it was plugged into. So typically the power cables are for CD-ROM drives, hard drives, anything like that. And then you have your main power supply down there, which is that white one. And then most of them still have this 4-prong plug over here near the CPU, which is that one right there. Sorry, trying to get in there, which is that one right there. But all of them, that's all pretty standard. But just make sure you remember where you're plugging everything back in, and that's it. So there's your four things that you can do if your computer is not starting up, if you're not getting any visuals, if you are getting any beeps in the beginning, or if the computer is on for a certain amount of time and then just turns itself off after a relatively short period of time. So thank you guys very much for watching on my little old school computer here, but this is all the same. There's nothing has changed except for the different adapters for the power supply. They're not all going to be these. Like I said, they will be closer to this, just a little wider. So thank you very much for watching, and I really hope this helps you guys out. So there's 4 troubleshooting ways, step by step, on how to get your computer running up again. If none of those ways work, switching out the memory, replacing a video card, putting the thermal paste on, adding a new power supply, then it's possible you could have like a blown capacitor in the motherboard, or just something wrong with the motherboard altogether. So, but that's all I have, and thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Later.